This, my fellow notebook aficionados, is the all-new ROG Zephyrus Duo for 2026, and it's easily one of the best high-end dual-screen laptops on the market. For one, because it is basically the only one, so it really does not have any competition at all, but even if there were, I'm quite confident that the Duo would come out on top, since Asus pretty much nailed the concept here. And while they cut back slightly on the performance focus of the last gen Duo from 2023, they did a great job at making it a bit more mobile and efficient, while at the same time upgrading the dual display experience quite a bit. So the ROG is much more a bigger and more powerful version of the ZenBook Duo than a direct follow-up to the original, but that's definitely the smart choice if you ask me. That said, the form factor and the whole concept of a dual-screen gaming or rather performance laptop is definitely not without its compromises, and while this one is definitely one of the coolest laptops around for 2026, I would argue that many of us would want this one, but only a very small group actually needs it and is ready to pay for the novelty. And yes, my dear friends, the Duo is incredibly expensive. But how about we get into it, since we have quite a bit to talk about. As always, let's kick things off with specs, and our sample of the Duo comes with Intel's Panther Lake flagship CPU for laptops with dedicated graphics, the Core Ultra 9 386H. That is quite the step down from the 16-core 32-thread Ryzen HX CPU from its predecessor, so let's hope the slower CPU is offset by better temps, lower fan noise and longer battery life, but more about all of that later. On the GPU side, you get a 5090 running with up to 135 watts in the ROG's turbo mode and up to 150 in manual. If that can make a difference in real-world scenarios, we will test of course, but I wouldn't get my hopes up here. In addition to the core components, you get 64 gigs of soldered but speedy RAM and a 2TB NVMe SSD with very impressive transfer rates. And behind this sort of maintenance cover, you get access to a second empty slot. Apparently, additional access would require completely taking apart the base unit, including the screen, so we unfortunately cannot get you any further insights into the inner workings of the Duo. When it comes to screens, Asus bets on a similar experience to what we have seen on both the ZenBook S16 and the A16. So you get a 2.8K resolution refreshing at 120Hz, and both panels are of course G-Sync capable. Overall brightness is solid for an OLED and a welcome upgrade over something like the G16 from last year. And by the way, we should get our hands on the new versions for 2026 quite soon, so definitely leave your sub so you won't miss our videos. The overall HDR experience for properly supported games like Death Stranding 2 or Pragmata is also excellent, with more than 1100 nits peak and 720 nits for an all-white image. Creators will also have their fair share of fun with factory calibration on reference level, additional pre-calibrated presets, and, well, you have tool screens. So everything, video editing, raw development, or even retouching in Photoshop, for example, is simply on another level with the Duo. And I'm not going to lie, something like the ROG would have been on the very top of my wishlist back then, when I was still in post-production as a freelance artist. Since when you are traveling for work, but still want as much screen real estate as somehow possible, well, this is the way. Of course, both screens are touch-enabled, and while you do have to live with a very slight graininess, both panels also support Asus's new Pro Pen 3, which worked flawlessly on the Duo in my brief time testing it so far. With all of that said, while the overall display experience will not really leave you wanting for more, it is definitely a compromise compared to the P16's tandem OLED, which I would assume is simply too expensive to put two in one chassis, and you also have to make do with a slower refresh rate compared to the G16, which is definitely something you will notice if you are an FPS gamer first. And the original Duo's mini LED was also a simply terrific panel. Our wireless measurements with our new routers also reveal some pretty speedy transfers, and the full-size SD card reader doesn't disappoint either with some very snappy overall numbers. Unfortunately, the 1080p webcam is a little bit of a disappointment, and while the overall port selection is alright with a pair of USB-A's and USB-C's in addition to an HDMI 2.1, I don't know, but considering the price point here and that this one also caters more towards a creator or power user crowd, I feel like at least one Thunderbolt 5 and maybe an additional USB-A would have gone a long way to future-proof such an investment and also make the Duo even more flexible. Alright, these are the facts and specs. So how is it all put together? Well, the Duo carries the Zephyrus branding confidently, and despite the dual screen construction, everything feels exceptionally solid and just a lot more streamlined than what we got on the 2023 variant, as much as I've enjoyed that one. Compared to the G16, the Duo is of course quite a bit bigger and heavier, but then again, you get a second screen, so that offsets things quite a bit. Overall build quality also leaves nothing to be desired, and even the keyboard feels solid enough despite its mobile nature. The included kickstand also keeps things in place quite securely, no matter the overall position, so you can even angle the second lower screen to your preference slightly. The hinges are also well adjusted despite the two large displays, and there's only minimal wobble when adjusting the positioning and almost none when you're working or typing on a not quite so stable surface. Alright, so before we get to performance, how about I walk you through all the different modes of the Duo, and let's kick things off with just using this one as a good old regular laptop. And similar to the Zephyrus' smaller sibling, the ZenBook Duo, Asus nailed the overall execution here. And while the general typing position is higher than on most laptops, it's still more than comfortable enough, at least for me personally. It also really helps that they did not compromise on overall typing quality, and the detachable keyboard feels on par with the G16 or P16 for example. And speaking of detaching the keyboard, simply pulling it up turns on the second screen, and since you still have a Bluetooth connection, you can go on typing away without any disruptions. And with just a few quick adjustments for the kickstand, you will have your dual screen workstation ready for whatever you want to do. Moving things between the two displays or changing modes is also super snappy, and with their Screen Expert software, Asus gives you a very handy tool to move and snap windows wherever you want them, turning the Duo into a proper multitasking monster. Presentation mode is also very well executed, and as soon as you fold the upper screen to the other side, you get this little pop-up that gives you additional options. And when you choose to mirror the screen, whoever sits on the other side sees everything you are doing, or you use the second display independently in this sort of presentation mode. You can even add a little preview window that shows you everything that's going on, and you can also highlight things and add a cover screen while you are getting ready to pitch your new video concepts to your boss. Is this really something you will need on a daily basis? Probably not, but the attention to detail here and making sure you get the most out of your dual screen laptop is definitely commendable, and as per usual, Asus did a great job making sure the software can keep up with the hardware here. The kickstand also allows you to use both screens in a vertical orientation, and while it's nice that you get the option, it's the least practical in my opinion, since not only do you lose access to some ports or your accessories are hanging on for dear life, and overall the setup simply does not feel as stable as when you have things in a horizontal orientation. Alrighty good people, how about we deal with performance next to see how the Duo compares to its single screen competition and against its direct predecessor. As per usual, we did some general testing so you can get a rough idea what you can get out of which operating mode, and for our testing we settled on Turbo. As a big surprise to absolutely no one, you are not getting this year's Duo for its CPU performance, and while it's not slow by any means, it's also not very fast. And the 7945HX in its predecessor, well, that one was an entirely different beast altogether. Just keep in mind that the Ryzen HX consumed almost double of what the Panther Lake Ultra 9 needs to achieve its scores. As per usual, we do not really have to talk about Apple here too much, since they are very much doing their own thing when it comes to CPU performance. System performance in our testing is also more than solid enough, and I was actually surprised how seamless the overall dual screen experience really is. Yes, when you wake the Duo from sleep, it takes a few seconds before everything behaves like it's supposed to be, which is unfortunately quite common for laptops with dedicated GPUs. And I also had some issues in the beginning because of some outdated Intel iGPU driver. But once I had those sorted, everything was working flawlessly, and no matter if I was gaming on a single screen plugged in, doing some productivity away from the wall, no matter the mode, if I was playing a game on one screen with having Discord open on the other, or if I was editing one of our videos, either with some reference material on the second screen or simply treating the Duo as a dual screen setup. Well, you can do it all, and if you rely on a second screen a lot and need it while being mobile, it simply does not get any better than this. And for me as a creator, I would love to have this one with me, for example, when going to CES or Computex. Sure, it's heavy, but the benefit of having two screens would easily outweigh, pun intended, the added strain on my back or the raised eyebrows from the airport personnel when they would dare to weigh my carry-on luggage. I only had the Duo for a little while for this video, and I hope I can keep it for 1 or 2 weeks after publishing this one, so I can properly daily drive it and do a follow-up. So if you have anything else that I haven't covered in this video, please make sure to leave your thoughts, questions or suggestions for a potential second video in the comments below. The mobile RTX 5090 performs similarly to what we have seen on other thinner than usual gaming laptops, with not quite the full wattage Nvidia's high-end laptop GPU is capable of, and so the 4090 in the 2023 Duo is still able to hold its own, thanks to the higher power limit and much more potent CPU, at least in our synthetics. The manual mode seems to be only for Asus's marketing material, so they can advertise the 150 watt GPU power limit, since again, in synthetics, you gain almost no additional performance. In our 1080p gaming performance rating, the new Duo performs quite alright though, and can sit atop of our comparison in this case for our selection of both newer and older titles tested in 1080p to equally put a strain on the CPU and GPU. Unfortunately, we cannot compare the results of the older Duo here, since we simply do not have any numbers in most titles. Moving things up to QHD in a few selected games, the story does not really change, and the Blade 16 is still the king of the thinner than usual gaming laptops thanks to its higher power levels. And to give you a point of comparison what a full wattage 5090 can do, I added the Legion Pro 7 we just recently reviewed to some of our compares. Since if you disregard the second screen, it comes in at a similar weight and size compared to the Duo. Once again, manual does not really offer any real-world benefits, as you can see in our Cyberpunk benchmarks as well, so Asus definitely found the sweet spot for the chassis with what they give you in the ROG's Turbo mode. On a bit more of a subjective note, and straying away from native rendering and taking upscaling and MFG into account, I'm still playing Death Stranding 2 and Pragmata. And of course the 5090 is quite well equipped for such high-end AAA story games. Kicking things off with Capcom's latest adventure, and in QHD with everything maxed out, including full path tracing and Nvidia's DLSS set to balanced, you get about 45ish FPS, while adding 3x MFG into the mix easily gets you close or even past the OLED's 120Hz refresh rate. In Death Stranding, I opted for the Duo's native resolution, did the DLSS 4.5 override in the Nvidia app, and set the game to DLSS performance to take advantage of the second generation transformer model, which gave me a pretty solid 50 to 60ish FPS experience with the game once again completely maxed out and looking quite amazing at the same time. I would personally add MFG again just to get a bit of a smoother overall experience. And by the way, if you want a bit more info about DLSS 4.5 and how it all works with the overrides, be sure to check out our dedicated video about Team Green's latest upscaling shenanigans. So that's performance, which leaves us with battery life and fan noise. And in general, the Duo is relatively quiet, but even when doing light tasks and no matter the performance mode, you will hear the fans spin up occasionally, especially when using both screens. It would not bother me that much personally, but it's definitely something to be aware of. Apart from that, you get the usual experience with thinner laptops that bet on high-end internals, but as always, hear for yourself. I also included some speaker samples, and why Asus did not bet on the same experience as with the G16 or P16 is simply beyond me. But I would guess it may simply be because of space constraints or some interference with the bottom OLED panel, because if it would be a cost-saving measure on a device this expensive, well, I don't know. It's not that the speakers are bad per se, it's just that they are quite a bit better on the others. Away from the wall we can see the Intel Panther Lake experience in full effect in about 14.5 hours with a single screen at 150 nits in our simulated Wi-Fi web surfing test, and almost 9 hours at full brightness is really solid, and even utilizing both screens gets you across the 10-hour mark. So you can definitely use everything the Duo has on its disposal, no matter if you have it plugged in or not. Alright folks, that's all I have for now. So what are we thinking about the Duo? If you need a dual screen laptop, well then this is it. Again, for one, there is simply no competition, and what Asus put together here is incredibly well executed. That said, would something like a G16, Plate 16 or well even a Legion Pro 7 with a somewhat decent small external screen be able to do most of what the Duo can for less of the upfront cost and maybe even with a bit of a performance boost? Definitely, but again it would not be one device, which can be both good and bad. I for one simply love this thing, just because it's so extra and it caters to a lot of my use cases, especially when I'm going to trade shows and stuff. But then again, it's a super niche device and the price reflects that. But please folks, let me know what you think, and if you have any specific use cases which would make the Duo perfect for you, you know the drill, sound off below. Please leave a like and sub on your way out, and make sure to check out our written review for more in-depth details for the ROG Zephyrus Duo 2026, and maybe have a look around the channel for more about tech and laptops. Thanks a ton for watching folks, my name is Alex, you have been absolutely fantastic and I can't wait to see you all in the next one. Take care.